I'm Jennifer Purcell, and welcome to my podcast, Living with an Invisible Learning Challenge, where we will discuss, discover, and learn more about the challenges and triumphs of those with NLD and other learning challenges. I do have a website for this podcast, and it is called livingwithnld.com. I also have a Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter account for the podcast. They are all under the same name, which is Living with NLD. I also have a YouTube channel for the podcast, which can be found by Googling the title of the podcast, which is Living with an Invisible Learning Challenge. I would like to tell you about a nonprofit that I use for my research for this podcast. It is called the NVLD Project, and I use their blog for my research. They are a nonprofit that is based in New York and is trying to get NVLD back on the DSM, and they provide many resources for people with NVLD on their website. I'll provide you with the website for them in the podcast description. All proceeds from the ads on this podcast will be donated towards the NVLD project. Please feel free to explore the other topics on the podcast, and hopefully you will learn something new from them. I hope you enjoy today's episodes. If you haven't heard about Anchor by Spotify, let me give you a rundown. Basically, it's the easiest way to make a podcast with everything you need all in one place. Here how it's work. Anchor lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to the most popular listening platforms, including Spotify, with a single tap. Anchor is also the only place you can publish video podcasts to Spotify. With Anchor, creators can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. And best of all, Anchor is totally free. Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. And the amount that you can upload on Anchor is unlimited, which is really helpful for me. And it also helps you with getting statistics for your podcast in terms of where people are listening from, so that you know how many people listen to your podcast all over the world. And today I am very excited to announce that BetterHelp is now sponsoring this podcast. I have had 7 years of therapy, so I know it can help change your life if you not only let it, but work on the personal goals that you set with your therapist. Without a healthy mind, being truly happy and at peace is hard. The good news is therapy works. But what is therapy exactly? It's whatever you want it to be. Maybe you're not feeling motivated right now and would like some tools to help. Or maybe you're feeling insecure in relationships at work, not dealing well with stress. Whatever you need, it's time to stop being ashamed of normal human struggles and start feeling better, because you deserve to be happy. And now you don't have to worry about finding an in-person therapist near you to help. BetterHelp is customized online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat sessions with your therapist, so you don't have to see anyone on camera if you don't want to. It's more affordable than in-person therapy, and you can start communicating with your therapist in under 48 hours. Join the millions of people who are seeing what online therapy is really about. It's always a good time to invest in yourself because you are the greatest asset. And special offering to listeners of Living with an Invisible Learning Challenge. You can get 10% off your first month of professional therapy at betterhelp.com/. I'll put in the link in the podcast description for you. That's BetterHelp, HELEP. Thanks again to BetterHelp for sponsoring this podcast.
Happy Friday from Jennifer Purcell, your host of Living with an Invisible Learning Challenge. So my update for you on my new podcasts is that I have created the trailers for all of them. And in case you missed anything, the person who did the logos, his name is Max Klein, and he also did the logo for this podcast and for my Sleepy Butterfly podcast. And I'll give you a short rundown of what the new podcasts are about. So the first one is called Shiro, Be Your Own Hero. And that one is about promoting heroism in both men and women's lives and trying to see if they can look deep inside themselves and realize that they have been their own hero at one point in time in their lives, whether they went through something traumatic personally or something traumatic with their family, like maybe they lost a loved one or a friend, or were sexually abused or something like that, that if they, and most people do this, that they let that traumatic event or incident in their life change them for the better instead of trying to have it break them down and destroy them. So that podcast looks at those events, and it will begin with my experience of those kinds of events, and it will also have interviews from other people who have experienced those things. And in terms of the interview, you can go as deep into the event that you experience that you want to reference, or as shallow. Do it on your comfort level, and I will come up with some questions for that soon whenever I have somebody reach out to me who wants to be interviewed. So that one is, again, called Shiro, Be Your Own Hero. And then the second one is, excuse me, called Chats, Barks, and Growls, Convos with My Pet, which is kind of meant to be a funny one and fun, where I'm going to be doing my voice in it, and Truffles, my dog, her voice kind of sounds like this. And that one is about bringing your pets to life, whether it's a dog or a cat or a fish, whatever pet you have, and telling the story of how you got them, how they've changed your life for the better, what they think about you or what you think about them. If you talk to them, what do you say or what do you think they would say back to you, sort of thing. So I thought that would be fun. So that one also includes interviews, obviously, with you and your pets or pet. And yeah, I will provide the emails for the new podcast in the description so you can email me about being interviewed. So that one was Chats, Barks, and Growls, Convos with Your Pet, or with my pet, because I include Truffles in it. Excuse me. And then the third one that I created is called Think Out, Free Your Imagination. And that one is about the imagination that I have. Well, it was more alive when I was little, but I still have a pretty vivid imagination for being neurodivergent. And my idea was to have your house fold up into a pocket size so you could take it with you on your international trips or wherever you went. And that way you would have your furniture there, and you would have your fridge, your bed, all the comforts of home with you right in your pocket. And I used to pretend that all the 400 stuffed animals I had, they all had names. I remembered all of them somehow back then. And I would pretend that they were protecting me against the dark side, kind of like in Star Wars, and that I was the leader of the light side, and there was a middle side. So that's kind of a sneak peek to that one. And that one also will include interviews of other neurodivergents and neurotypicals as well, asking them about what they used to pretend about when they were little, um, and about their dreams. We all have pretty interesting dreams when we're asleep, um, and sometimes they're nightmares or sometimes they're weird, kind of like the movie Inception, if you've seen that before. So I thought that would be a fun one to do as well. So again, that's called Think Out for Your Imagination. And I will include the links to the new podcast trailers and all the information you need uh, to learn more about them in the description for you. Thanks for listening to my update.
I also want to mention to you that I just launched my podcast swag on Wednesday of this week and have a page for it on my website, and I will also send you the link to it in the podcast description, and I will also send it to you in the newsletter that I usually send out on Fridays. I am now selling t-shirts, water bottles, and a backpack, and they all have the podcast logo and title on it and the tagline. So I'm looking forward to watching the sales and seeing who buys them, and spreading the word more about my podcast.
Okay, so today's episode will be on how to be an advocate for yourself at work and school, acquiring and how to acquire accommodations for jobs and in school. So, and this will be specifically on NLD, but you can definitely apply some of the things I'm going to talk about to other learning challenges like autism or ADHD or Asperger's, etc. So, have you ever had difficulty advocating for yourself in school, work, or your personal life because you are neurodivergent? I have had this experience many times in my life, especially when I wasn't working for my parents or trying to describe why I needed extra help from a professor in college. I found it difficult in college to describe how best my professors could help me with assignments because I was still learning about how to help myself in the best way, because I was diagnosed in college with NLD. And I was diagnosed in between the end of my sophomore year and the beginning of my junior year, so halfway through. So you can advocate for yourself better when you know how you learn, how best someone can help you with your challenges, and when you know when you need someone's help. It was easier for me to help myself and explain to my family, classmates, friends, and professors how they could help me when I had my testing done. It also made it easier for me to describe to others once I had assisted myself with things I found challenging, because then I knew how others could help me, or at least I tried to know that. This was true because then I knew why I had so many challenges with certain things and how I learned and remembered some things in different ways, talking about after my testing. It was easier for me to do well in college once I had my accommodations. And the accommodations were having my textbooks in audio format made it easier to remember what I was reading. It also made it easier to make notes because I could type them right on the page. I could also highlight information while I was reading. And for those of you who are still in college, or maybe you're in high school, or maybe even middle school, I'm not sure if you can get these accommodations because I've been out of school for a while. But the program I used or that was provided for me to convert my textbooks to audio, I believe it was called, Kurizewhiel 3000. And um, I'll provide that spelling in the podcast description for you. And then The other accommodations I had were recording audio of lectures, and I used Audionotaker or Sonnocent for that. And that was helpful because while it was recording the audio, I could also type notes if I wanted to, or just listen to the professor. Um, and I could input slides if they were giving a PowerPoint presentation and I had the slides beforehand, I could put them in there as well. And I found that really helpful because I could listen to it later on when I was reviewing for a test or for a midterm, or maybe for a paper to try to review the material that I was going to write the paper on. So that was helpful for me. Um, and then the last thing I had was extended time on my tests. I had an extra hour and a half to help with my test anxiety because I was homeschooled before college. I wasn't really used to doing tests in a lot amount of time. I was used to having as much time as I wanted to do it as long as I did it in one sitting. Um, so being underneath a time constraint was tricky for me and challenging. So having the extra time was helpful. I also took the test in a room by myself or with fewer students, and that was also helpful to minimize the distractions. And if I wanted to, I could have my emotional support dog Truffles with me, which was very calming sometimes. You know, I could pet her when I got stressed out, if I didn't know the answer right away, or needed to take a mental break. Um, so that was helpful as well. And then when I was in my math classes, when I took those in the beginning years, I could have a calculator when I was doing the testing, and that was helpful as well. And I was allowed to have a little cheat sheet of the formulas because I had challenge memorizing all the symbols in the formula. I could remember when to use it, but it was hard for me to memorize all those symbols. So that was helpful for me. Um, and again, I'll try to put the names of the programs in the description for you. That way, if you're a student or a teacher or a parent, you can explore those on your own and you can see if they would help somebody you know. So it was easier for me to have others help me when I knew what I needed help with and how best they could help me. It took me many times, it took many times for my mom to figure out how to help me with writing essays better. It was easier when my GSI Alex, I've mentioned him before, helped me sometimes because he knew what I was learning about better in class than my mom did. This was true because Alex had read the material for my social theory class and knew how to help me understand it so I could write essays on it better. I believe his interview is number 19 in year one if you want to listen to it. My mom's job was to help me with proofreading my essays so they sounded better, flowed, and read better. She was good at doing that because she knew how my brain worked through and thought about and processed things since she had researched NLP quite a bit and had lived with me for my whole life. She also is very good at helping me with managing my finances and budget. She is usually able to explain those things in a way to me that I will understand, even if she can't explain it easily. She tries to, look it over for me so that she can explain it later once she understands it better herself. So now I'm talking more about personal things and academic things. Before I was working for my parents, and this is about previous jobs, it was hard for me to describe how my employers and employees could help me with my challenges. This was true because I didn't know how best they could help me without knowing about NLD, what it was, and how to understand it. I was still learning what challenges I would run across in the work world because I had just started working after graduation. And in addition to working, I was getting used to driving more, which made it challenging to arrive on time to work because I wasn't very familiar with how long it would take me to drive to various places. Okay, enough about me. Here are some tips from articles about how you can advocate for yourself in different ways and in different settings. This article is titled How to Effectively Advocate for Yourself at Work by Dr. Lee. Quote, it's often tough living in a neurotypical world when you're neurodiverse. That makes it necessary to find and or create safe spaces for yourself. Therapy is one such place if you can find a counselor who celebrates neurodiversity. The goal of your sessions should not be to, in quotes, cure or, in quotes, fix you. Rather, you and your therapist will work as partners to celebrate your strengths, learn how to leverage your strengths, problem solve what small changes can be made to help you thrive, and discover ways for you to appropriately advocate for yourself at work. End quote. How do I relate to that quote or article? So, for me, I have a therapist myself that I've talked to about working for my parents and my previous jobs as well. And usually I talk to her about some things that might frustrate me at work. Like one example from this week was um, my mom is a New Thought minister, and I try to help her research songs for her message on Sundays. And I do it in advance. I make a playlist in Apple Music. And usually I give her about 8 or 10 songs. And usually she only needs 4 or 3. But I give her more choices so she has plenty to choose from. And sometimes, actually quite often, um, it's hard to streamline that process because sometimes I don't give her quite the right song for the message, or we don't have the artist for the song, and it's hard to find the lyrics or the chart for it. In addition to that, as well, when we give the music choices or song choices to our music team, it takes a while for them to get back with us about what song they want to sing is in the right key for them, and so forth. Sorry, and so forth. Got tongue-tied there. So that whole process is a little hard to streamline for us because sometimes the music team doesn't get back with us in a timely manner, which makes it hard for us to finalize the song choices and the lyrics and the charts and all that stuff. So my point in bringing this up was I was kind of frustrated with myself than with my mom, because there was a song she had chosen, and I got too tunneled down or too in the details of not having the artist for the song. And I could find the lyrics, but I couldn't find the chart for it because I didn't have the artist. And I was concerned about trying to copyright for it. So anyways, I was too bogged down in the details instead of thinking of the big picture of how can I streamline this process better for her, and how can I not get so caught up in the details of the situation. So I talked to my therapist about it, and I realized, well, maybe when that happens, when we do have a song that doesn't have the artist, that we have a backup choice that we do know we have the artist for, and we have the chart and the lyrics for, because we've already used it before, or it's easy to access because it's a popular song, or maybe it's just a a song that we know more about than we do sometimes with other songs. So that was something I came up with her help, and also trying to figure out um, how to have the music team come back to us in a more timely manner. That's kind of tricky because their lives are pretty busy. They sing for other people, other churches as well, or other spiritual places, and they have their own lives to uh, handle and deal with. So that is kind of tricky, and my mom is in charge of that area. So for me, I'll try to streamline more what I do for her and see if that does anything better. So, anyways, back to the articles. Let me take a sip of water first. Okay. Another article titled Self Advocacy by Stephen M. Shore. Quote, to understand the dilemma that people on the autism spectrum often find themselves in, consider the following scenarios. 1. You have just been shown your new office, which consists of a cubicle lit with fluorescent lights. To a person with autism, this may feel like working under a strobe light. 2. You're in high school. It's time for a math test where each page has 10 questions. The scratching sound made by the other students' writing implements drives you quite literally to distraction. Not only that, but all those math questions on the test seem to jumble together. Or you have recently met a special person with whom you think you'd like to have a long term relationship with. Until now, you have put on a good act, in quotes, pretending to be normal. And she hasn't noticed a thing, or he, yet, or has she or he, end quote. So I can definitely relate to those different scenarios, from the first one about um, being in a new workplace. Even though I don't have autism, I can relate to these because I'm sensitive to fluorescent lights because of my chronic migraines. So I wear blue light blocking glasses to help with those. And the next scenario being in high school with a math test. Oh boy, I can relate to that. I don't like math at all. I've gotten better at basic math because of doing tons of years of practice on it with tutors and with my parents' help and my brother's help. But it's still challenging for me sometimes. And I've talked about that on this podcast before. And like I mentioned earlier with my test anxiety, distractions of noises definitely doesn't help. Um, and sometimes they do get jumbled together when you're taking a test in terms of all the questions and you're like, okay, I need to clear my head, take a few deep breaths, and figure out how to do this and break it down. But sometimes it's hard to do that process. And then with the last scenario of meeting a special person that you might want to have as a significant other, and you've gone on a couple dates with them and you really like them, or you think um, get along together, and like the article says, you've been trying to pretend to be normal. Well, let me tell you something. I've been dating more this year, online dating, of course. I've talked about this in detail in a previous episode recently. And it's hard for me to mask personally because I don't really like pretending to be somebody else that I'm not. I really like being authentically me, even though I'm neurodivergent and I'm on the less severe spectrum of neurodivergent and having an LD and chronic migraines. I include that because sometimes it does feel like a disability. Um, and for me, my point is that uh, online dating isn't easy because It's online. There's a lot of nonverbal things involved in it with the messaging, and you don't know the tone behind the messages that you receive from the guy or girl until you meet them in person or talk with them on the phone. You can't really tell what their emotion is behind the messaging. But what I've found is that if I say in general terms, in broad terms, which is sometimes hard for people, neurodivergent people, to do, about what I struggle with, um, then that makes it a little bit easier for me and for them. Like, for example, I usually mention sarcasm. Sometimes I don't get sarcasm. Sometimes it goes right over my head um, with the jokes. So I mention that because that's kind of has to do with communication. And if you're talking on the phone or you're dating in person or even messaging somebody and they message you a joke and you don't get it, it can be a little bit embarrassing for the other person and for you of like, well, you were trying to make me laugh. I know that, but I didn't get it. Or maybe you took it too seriously and didn't know they were joking. Um, so I try to let them know about that generally, excuse me, so that they're aware of that. Um, Also, I usually try to mention to them that I've been through some pretty tough things in my life. I don't go into detail about what those things are until I'm comfortable and I can trust them, or I think I can trust them, um, because they're pretty personal, as you know if you've listened to the podcast. Um, but I try to be general about it because if I really like them and I think they really like me, I want them to know some general things about me before they go further, because sometimes people, unfortunately, they don't want to date somebody who's neurodivergent, um, because maybe they think it could be more of a burden on their life or make it more challenging. And, maybe I'm wrong about what I said there, but sometimes that can be true. And other times it's just something about them and not you. And then you have to realize that uh, and try to not take it so personally if things go differently than you imagined with them. And that has also happened to me. Or maybe they ghost you and they don't communicate with you for a while, or at all after they've been doing it for about a week or a month. Um, and then you don't know why they stopped communicating with you usually when that happens. And I've had that happen a lot too. So what I'm trying to say here is um, try to be gentle with yourself when you're doing dating, whether it's online or in person, um, and try to be gentle with the other person as well, and let them know upfront about some things that you want them to know if you're comfortable with doing that, and try to treat them like you would with your friends or your best friend, because usually you start out the relationship that way. And as you get to know them better and you think you like them in a romantic way, then it turns into something different than a friendship, um, or solely friendship. I mean, you do want to be friends with them. I think that's important. Um, so, enough about dating. Let's go on to a different article. The last article is titled Embracing Neurodivergence and Becoming a Constant Self Advocate by J.R. Reed, who has autism and Asperger's. And, quote, one of the reasons I self advocate for the neurodivergent community is to educate those who don't understand us and to get them to accept us as we are and include us as part of their community. That community can take many forms: school, business, social groups, family, friends, and neighbors. I roll with a group of hardcore self advocates, both online and in person, and we all have the same goal: to one day see a society united. Not neurotypical or neurodivergent, but simply people. The reality is that we are just, as Jeannie said, rebellious, defiant, and uncontrollable. We rebel against a culture that says we're no good and tries to push us to the side. We're defiant and push back when society tries to sweep us under the rug. And we're uncontrollable in the sense that we're no longer willing to be seen simply as weird, odd, or strange. End quote. So I definitely can relate to that quote. How do I relate to it? Well, for me, I definitely feel like I'm a neurodivergent living in a neurotypical world. And I've mentioned this before on this podcast also recently. Um, but basically, for me, um, sometimes it's challenging when I interact with people who don't know I have an LD because whether this is at work or in my social life with my spiritual community or with my friends. Some of them, my friends do know I have an LD, but usually not everybody at work in my spiritual place does. And if they do, they're still learning about it, and about me. So I try to keep that all in mind when I interact with them and try to use that to help me um, navigate social situations with them. So, what I mean by that is, like the article said, sometimes I do feel like I'm weird, odd, or strange, or like I'm swept underneath the rug, and people don't realize how invisible sometimes I feel. Or they think that we're not very good at trying to be better at neurotypical things. And they just, like the article said, push us to the side. Um, and I don't think neurotypicals are aware that they do that, or they don't do it intentionally um, if they are doing that. And unfortunately, sometimes they do it intentionally in school or at work. But what I'm trying to say here is that I definitely have felt those feelings that the article said before. And I try to, instead of blaming it on that one neurotypical that I interacted with, I try to ask myself, okay, how much do I think they know about what it's like to be a neurodivergent and what we go through each and every day of our lives? And sometimes, if they're somebody like my friends that I'm close with or my family, well, they definitely know more than some neurotypicals do. Or if they listen to my podcast, they definitely know more. Or if they work with me, they definitely know more. But if they're outside of that circle, then, and they're still learning, which is fine, they're still being aware of neurodivergence and what it's like to be in our shoes and what we go through, and they don't even know if you're neurodivergent, well, then that's another factor. So I try to remember those things and try to help them with educating them and have them be more aware and try to increase their understanding if I can on those matters. That's why I have this podcast. And that's why I try to be authentically me in any scenario that social scenario that I experience in my life. So I hope these tidbits today helped you, whether you're neurodivergent or neurotypical, or maybe you think you're somewhere in between, which definitely happens. Where you're questioning, am I neurodivergent or am neurotypical? That's what I meant by somewhere in between. Or if you are neurotypical and you have a friend or a loved one who's neurodivergent, I hope that this episode helped you gain some insight on how you can help them be an advocate for themselves, because sometimes it's hard for us neurodivergents to do that for ourselves, even though we try really hard to. It's sometimes hard for us to do that. So I hope that you learned how you can advocate for yourself or for others in different situations, whether that's academic, professional, social, or personal. And I look forward to talking to you next week about another interview that I did with Olivia. And I hope you have a good week. And I'll chat with you next Friday. Bye.
And today I am very excited to announce that BetterHelp is now sponsoring this podcast. I have had 7 years of therapy, so I know it can help change your life if you not only let it, but work on the personal goals that you set with your therapist. Without a healthy mind, being truly happy and at peace is hard. The good news is therapy works. But what is therapy exactly? It's whatever you want it to be. Maybe you're not feeling motivated right now and would like some tools to help. Or maybe you're feeling insecure in relationships at work, not dealing well with stress. Whatever you need, it's time to stop being ashamed of normal human struggles and start feeling better because you deserve to be happy. And now you don't have to worry about finding an in person therapist near you to help. BetterHelp is customized online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat sessions with your therapist. So you don't have to see anyone on camera if you don't want to. It's more affordable than in person therapy, and you can start communicating with your therapist in under 48 hours. Join the millions of people who are seeing what online therapy is really about. It's always a good time to invest in yourself because you are the greatest asset. And special offering to listeners of Living with an Invisible Learning Challenge. You can get 10% off your first month of professional therapy at betterhelp.com/. I'll put in the link in the podcast description for you. That's BetterHelp, HELEP. Thanks again to BetterHelp for sponsoring this podcast.
As I wrap up, there are some things I would like to share with you. I do have a website for this podcast. It is called livingwithanld.com. I also have a Facebook and Instagram page for this podcast. It is called Living with NLD. I will include the links for those in the description. In conclusion, I would like to hear from my audience. If you know individuals with NLD that I could interview for this podcast, please email me at livingwithnld@gmail.com. What are you interested in learning about NLD? I know I'm not an expert, but I do know I have the living experience of having it. I would like you to practice journaling about your gifts and differences. Also see if there is a way that you can make that difference become easier for you to do than it originally was. Thank you for listening today, and please go to my YouTube channel and subscribe to it. Thank you. Bye.